Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Finance meeting. Thank you to Simsbury Community Television for broadcasting this. We'll call the meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. Please join me to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get through the meeting, a couple of sort of housekeeping things before we get to the director's report. I did have a conversation with the town manager, and she is in the future going to schedule us a meeting to talk about union negotiations and contract negotiations, which we'll do under one of the exceptions of FOIA, so it won't be a public meeting because it regards negotiation strategies, but that will be coming up, and I wanted to let the board know that. So when we get to discussions about the actuary's report, there are some issues that may touch on union negotiations, but we'll do that in executive session instead of publicly. So we'll let Amy, why don't you kick us off with the finance director's report? I do want to mention one thing before she begins. We had asked Amy to put projected year-end projections in a column, which she will be doing in the quarterly reports, but it actually takes a tremendous amount of time to do that for every monthly report. So we'll see that column once we get to the quarterly reports. And with that, Amy, we'll let you begin.
Okay, great. So under the grants and donations, this is just an updated listing of grants and donations that have been submitted to the Board of Selectmen and been approved by the Board of Selectmen. They've either been awarded, already donated, or if they haven't been, there's a little parentheses after it letting you know that the application is still in progress. So I didn't know if anybody had any questions on those grants specifically before I move on to the ARPA update.
Are there any questions? Derek, I can't see you, so pipe in if you have one. Okay.
Moving on to the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARPA update. So as you all are aware, previously reported out, we're expected to receive $7.5 million. We were operating under the interim guidance that the Treasury had released. And now finally, the final guidance has been released by Treasury, which is some good news. We have been waiting for it for months. So just a quick update that we're going to be reviewing that guidance this week and then put together some materials for the ARPA work group, which is then going to be meeting the week of January 31st. So preliminarily, I can tell you what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that the revenue loss, each town gets to claim revenue loss, no longer based on a formula, but up to $10 million. So therefore, our entire award of $7.5 million would be completely eligible under revenue loss. That is what I'm hearing from my fellow finance directors. I have not read the guidance in detail yet, so I do not want to go based on rumor because rumors have been wrong before. But just to let you know that that's what I'm hearing, and I'm thinking that we're going to see a lot more flexibility with the funds. But again, I'll be confirming that this week and then reporting out to the ARPA work group the week of January 31st.
Are there any questions on ARPA before we move on? Just to Amy's point, the initial read does look like we're going to have more options than we thought we were going to have on the interim final rule. So what our role is going to be in that as part of ARPA's, we don't really know, but it's probably going to be more limited. This is mostly a Board of Selectmen prioritization. Of course, we can comment on it, and we will have an opportunity to give some feedback. There will be a hearing coming up on ARPA. Is Wendy on the phone?
Yeah, I just got on.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to talk about the public hearing?
Yeah, well, we're going to be on Zoom, so people could write in or join. And I just talked to Maria. We did our agenda prep, so I'm asking that when we push out the agenda to the public, that we include some of the links and information that's new to add to that. So people who want to do their homework before they come to the public hearing, if they do, they'd be able to look up some of the guidance that we got from that federal meeting that we went to. And then, also Amy, if anything that you have that might be good out there for anybody would be great.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Amy, for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Moving on to the fiscal year 21 audit report. So Bloom Shapiro was recently purchased by Larson and Allen, which was reported out previously. They are having some challenges with their integration as far as getting their audit reports out as timely as they used to, new policies, new procedures, new people, also experiencing some of the labor shortages. So they have what they need from us. They are just not able to bundle up those reports. And so they asked that we file for an extension through the end of January. So we did do that. And then actually yesterday, I just heard from our audit manager that they need to request a couple other additional items from us, and then it can go through the review process. And to give us some extra leeway, they asked that we file a second extension through the end of February. So that is an update as of literally yesterday. So chances are you will see the auditor sometime in March.
March is going to be a pretty busy time for us. We may have to schedule an extra special meeting or something in there. Amy, I did ask Amy when that contract is up, and it goes through fiscal year 23-24. And at that point, we can look at the quality of the services we're getting and make sure the transition is something we're comfortable with. Is that about right? Okay.
Yes, that's accurate. And then the new monthly financial summary that Lisa had me put together. I'll just hit some highlights here of some of the major variances. And then if you guys have additional questions, feel free to pipe in. So under the revenues, this is where you'll see the majority of the variances. So under general government, you'll see that we were about 63 million this time last year. And this year, we're only about 53 million. So this is just a timing variance. Last year, in December, we posted about $10 million of revenue. Right now, our December activity is not posted due to the transition with Munis, staff moving around. And typically that's when we start preparing our quarterly reports, which is why you get your quarterly in February. So I expect that to be trued up by the time we get to the quarterly report in next month. So that one was just a timing issue. And then if we move down to public safety and parks and recreation, these are both the same reason. We just have to do a December journal entry to true up the amount of expenditures that we charge to the Board of Education. So that's just an internal journal entry. And then under education, you will see that we had a 25% of revenue collected at this time last year and only 1% this year. And that's just timing of the ECS payment of about 1.5 million, which was received last year as compared to the timing for this year. So it just hasn't come in yet. So those are the main variances from last year to this year. Although under general government, even though the taxes are the main variance, I did want to mention two other things. The building department is trending down compared to last year. So it's a variance from this time last year to last time last year of about $630,000. So last year we had two really big months in September and October. So September we collected revenue of about $110,000. This September it was only $45,000. October of last year was $431,000. October of this year is only $51,000. So we are definitely seeing the downward trend. And I think last year we had some of those bigger projects at the beginning of the year as well. So it's just going to be something to keep an eye on as we go into the spring, because as you know, in the spring is when we get the majority of our revenue. People start taking out building permits, doing things to their houses, breaking ground, things of that nature. And then to a much smaller scale, but kind of the same theme, the town clerk conveyance fees, we are trending downward with those as well. But again, we'll keep an eye on it for the spring market when things start coming on the market, houses start selling more. It's more of their boom time. So that's all I had for highlights and major variances. If you had any other questions.
I'll start with board members. I had a couple, but are there any board members who want to speak first?
Amy, when do we expect to have the ECS funding in? And does it vary widely year over year as to when we get them?
No, it's usually within the same like month or two. So we'll get it. We'll probably get it by January.
Okay. Sorry.
Is there anyone else at this point? Okay.
Go ahead.
Couple of things. One, I love the new format. I think it's very easy to sort of see trends. So great job with that. And your summary of the variances was very helpful. One thing, just in the columns under revenues, should it be percent spent or percent received under revenues?
Oh yeah, it should be either received or earned, whatever you want it to show it. And change it to received.
Yeah, I leave that to you. And then can you speak to the unassigned balance and why it looks so large?
Yeah, so this is just a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean anything as far as year end goes. It's just where are we right now. So if you take where we landed last year and then you add the fiscal year 22 balance as of 12/31/21 revenues, that 54 million, you subtract out the 50 million in expenditures, and that's your $4 million increase to the unassigned fund balance.
But it doesn't mean we're seeing a jump to, and we'll have a better projection in February.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that because that was rather large. The other thing I'll mention with the building trend, part of the reason we do the tax collection assumption rate the way we do is to accommodate precisely this situation. We do know that some of our revenue calculations are imprecise because of factors that are beyond our control. So this, because of the tax collection assumption rate, does enable us to comfortably accommodate a loss in revenue. Obviously, we want to monitor it and we hope it gets better because if it does get better, we'll have more money to use for capital reserves and other things. But that is precisely why we do the property tax collection rate as we do. Are there any other questions before we move on? Okay. Has Linda been able to join us yet? Do we know?
No, she's not on.
Art, can you text her and see?
I just called her and got a recording. I can text as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we'll go on to the Special Revenue Fund closeout. This was on our agenda last meeting, so this is part of our practice to put it out there, pause, and see if there are any feedback or comments before we take a formal action. And I'll turn it over to Amy to see if there were any comments and to just briefly summarize again where we are with that before we take a motion.
So no comments received. On the police fund in particular, I did reach out to the police chief just to make sure he had seen it and he was with it, and he was, so that was fine. So these are basically 3 special revenue funds where we can start, the Board of Finance had asked that we start either closing out or reducing the number of special revenue funds as we can. So these are 3 special revenue funds that have not been used in a long time, with the exception of the police vehicle fund, that can be closed out and either housed in a different fund and spent in accordance with its purpose, or it can go to another fund. Well, mainly the police vehicles, it can go to the capital fund to offset our capital purchases in the future. So it would still be used in the same capacity. It would just hold in a different fund and probably a more appropriate fund. So just a super high level summary of what we talked about last time. If anybody else has any questions or needs anything clarified that they don't remember from last time, I'm happy to answer.
So we're talking about closing the police vehicles fund, the incentive housing fund, and the DARE fund, just for our clerk. And by the way, thank you to our clerk. Are there any questions from board members? Okay, with that, I will request a motion to move effective December. I guess that would be January 18th, right? To move effective January 18th to close out the police vehicles incentive housing and DARE program funds in accordance with recommendations outlined by staff contained in our packet.
I'd be glad to move. As you stated, the police vehicles fund, incentive housing fund, and drug awareness Resistance Education Fund be deleted as per this document.
So we
I
have
second the motion.
motion by Art, second by Bert. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy, for your work in putting that together. Much appreciated. We're now going on to the Board of Finance agenda item submission form on, and I'm losing my place here, on decision points, goals, and information. So I put this together as a draft. We have some decision points that we make during the budget process. Some have already been made, and it's just to reaffirm current town policy, but some will involve decision points. And then I put in there goals because this is really, for me, when I have to do the public hearing, I have to do a slide that says the Board of Finance's goals are, and I thought I should check with you to make sure we're all in agreement. This is a draft document. I really don't feel, you should not feel in any way if you want to make suggestions. I don't mind at all. If you want to do deletions, that's fine too. It was drafted under the theory that it's easier to edit than it is to create. So feel free to wordsmith it if you want. I do want to get to the pension investment assumption, but I would just ask that we do that last, because we'll take a look at the budget modeling and we'll talk about the actuary report at that point. So I will open it up to, if you don't mind, we'll start with the goals, which is on page 8. Because this, I just need to get a handle from our board to make sure we're comfortable with them, because I will present them as our board goals. So if anyone wants to add one, delete one, change the words.
I don't see any surprises here, Madam Chair. Am I right? I don't see any additions or subtractions. You're making explicit things that we have talked about doing, and now we're actually doing it. Is that an accurate portrayal of what we have in front of us?
It was certainly my intention. Whether I was able to do that or not, I don't know.
Yeah, no. That's what I thought. Yeah, I think it's valuable. I think we need to state explicitly this is what we're doing, and we have conversations with the other boards, and we move forward. We should do so on a no surprises. This is what we've been saying basis, and so I think it's healthy.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, Lisa. Does anywhere in our goals, and I just, maybe I skipped over it, does it explicitly say that our goal is to, maybe it's more of our mission than a goal, but to set the mill rate?
So I did not put that as a goal, because I agree with you. I think it's more like that's our obligation. We're required by charter. So I hope we meet that. Right?
It's a legal requirement, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, You're right. I mean, I did, one of the things I put in there related to the mill, which was, and if you want to wordsmith it, that's fine too, make every effort to limit the increase in taxes to accomplish town goals. That's related to the mill. We didn't say to come in at a specific mill rate, but.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Yeah, I think I answered my own question. Yeah, these are great.
Okay. And then the other stuff, the financial goals, the process goals, are things that we have talked about that we try and do at every meeting. And I just thought it was worth reviewing. I don't think we'll use those at the public hearing because they're a little wonky and a little bit detailed. But to the extent people have had a chance to review them, is there anything that we missed? Anything that you'd like to add? Anything that's off base? Okay. And then we get to requests for information. One of the things are both our charter and Connecticut general statutes. One of the things the Board of Finance gets to do is ask for stuff. And so we, every year we ask for ranked capital as a way to help the town prioritize capital. Detailed information, which I think they've gotten much better at on the capital. And they're also listed as best practices from Robert Bland, a budgeting guide for local government. One of the things I put down there that I think our board has expressed an interest in is to summarize new programs or positions or adjustments from one line to another and savings initiatives so that we can see it all in one place. What are the new programs? If there are any lateral changes, please let us know. And then what are the savings you've used to offset some of the increases? Another thing that I added was for new programming or positions, and I added this because I think we've requested it and talked about it, but let me know if I have it wrong. For new programming or positions, describe the linkages between proposed appropriations and anticipated results, a cost-benefit analysis, and describe or provide data analyzed for assessing the need and how the town or school will be measuring performance. And that's consistent with this board's expressed interest in making decisions based on data-based analysis. So that's sort of new. And then for the grand list, one of the things I had talked to Amy about was including, when we get that report in February, an abatement summary, a list of exemptions for personal property and real estate, and updated 5-year grand list projections. So one of the things also in here are benchmark comparisons with other towns. Some of them are part of our policy as we analyze debt. There are certain benchmarks our policy requires us to look at, and then additional benchmarks that we've used in the past. But I wanted to see if there was any other information that people wanted in advance. We can continue to ask for information, but always better to get things to people early. I don't think this is anything new or actually extraordinary.
Madam Chair, one of the things that we have discussed from time to time is the number of vacancies and the fill rate. And I'm not sure that's worth adding or not, but it does come up that, for example, if we say we need 20 more people in this department, most people would say you don't budget 20 more, because in the course of the year they probably will, get a certain they may get 15, 18 of them and so on. Would that help with this, or is that subsumed? I just raised the question without strong feelings behind it.
I would ask Amy, is that something we could easily get? Is that hard to get? I know it's been a topic of discussion, certainly at our board and with the town manager. What guidance do you have for us?
Well, I know it's something that they've been talking about since the request was made, so I can throw it out there and see how far they've come, what roadblocks they found, or if they found it quite easy, and see if that's something that they can include in the budget books.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other suggestions?
With respect to capital projects, would it make sense to ask for specific information about how they are or might be linked to long-term capital plans?
I think that's a great suggestion. We've done a lot of long-term planning, so to the extent the capital programs are linked to those plans, it would be very helpful to see that. Great suggestion, Bert. All right. So what we'll do.
I had another question about possibly because, that recently the Federal Reserve has indicated they're going to be raising interest rates in the next year in response to our high inflation. And I was wondering if, pardon me, my dog's unhappy about this meeting, if there'd be any way to anticipate, or if it's appropriate for us to ask for opinions about how those rates might affect projections about the cost of bonding. And I'm going to mute so that you don't hear anymore.
No, I think that's absolutely appropriate. Amy, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to our bond advisor to get any insight he might have on that. That's something obviously that's been a worry, or at least a concern, raised at the national level. So it makes sense to start to anticipate for long-term planning, whether that changes any of our assumptions or what we can expect. I know, Derek, you also had a question about cost. Do you want to speak to those?
Well, yeah, with specific to just our long-term planning around the improvement of our schools. It's something that I'll probably be bringing up to the building committee, and either separately or in one of their meetings, just to be monitoring what kind of increases in costs, for materials, for labor. Very importantly, I think, as we'll see over the next year or so, what the implications are of general inflation on a budget will have on what we estimated the cost for the redevelopment of Latimer Lane, and the associated contingencies and escalators that we hopefully layered into that budget, just to get a refresher on where costs stand now. That said, anything that they're able to provide for us will be point in time, as we expect remained heightened inflation for this, at least the first 6 months of the year. But it really won't be until we have a construction set of drawings that will we be able to more likely be able to fine tune what the cost will be. So I don't know where that process stands or if drawings have even begun. But that certainly will be on, kind of front and center for me in terms of distribution of those funds, the potential of more bonding, and I don't know if that's possible, but it's something we might have to consider, just based on the magnitude of what I expect the costs, I'll say overruns, will be compared to what we were shown, I guess, a year or so ago.
Amy, where will we see that analysis? Is that something that will come in during the capital improvement planning and the budget when we get to it, or is it something we should be looking at before then?
No, it's something that we're going to take a look at during budget. They've actually been working with Tecton, and we're not at the point yet. We haven't gotten all of the bids in, and they haven't analyzed all of the bids. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So to Derek's point, they are going to be prepared to talk about it during the budget process. If nothing else, they'll give you an update on where they stand. But on the current capital that's in the capital plan and the CNR plans in the current year being proposed in the out years, I know all of our department heads are going back out and getting new quotes to make sure that we are taking into account the labor shortages, the inflation, things of that nature when we're putting together the new proposal of costs.
And Amy, do you know if they go through a bid leveling process just to make sure that the scope of services that each bid is contemplating is for the same services kind of across the board? We don't want to miss on scope.
So, it's funny you say that, because they're actually taking a different approach than what I've ever seen before. And it's probably just because I haven't been part of these major projects, but our owner's rep actually recommended that we go out piecemeal to bid for a couple of reasons, so that the scope is clear in the RFP documents. And then in addition to that, if we start bidding out now, granted costs are high now, but anticipating that they're going to get higher, try to lock in some of those dollars sooner. So they're actually doing a phased approach to their bid process.
Okay. And have drawings started, or? I
don't know. I can find out for you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful. A couple of points just to follow up on there is, obviously we're seeing costs as a reflection of inflation. Some new information since December. The latest inflation numbers came in at 7%, which is CPI. And I did want to alert the board to a development that I had been unaware of at the time of the tri-board, but it looks like Medicare Part B and D premiums that are deducted from Social Security checks increased 14.5%. So while our seniors are getting an increase in COLA, it's going to be hit by the increase in Medicare Part B and D. On Monday, January 10th, Health and Human Services Director Xavier Becerra indicated in a press release that he has asked Medicare to reassess that recommendation, so that may come down. But if it doesn't, that 5.9% increase COLA doesn't get us to the 7% inflation, and it gets reduced by the Medicare Part B and D premiums. So when we start to think about affordability, that's something we should add to our calculations. So we think about that. We're going to turn to decision points, but first I just wanted to ask a question to Amy. Our calendar is very tight this year. So after we get the presentations from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, the time we have then to sort of think about it before sending it to public hearing is very, very minimal. So our ability to make changes is going to be constrained until probably at the hearing or at a continued hearing. So I just wanted to, Amy, if you could give some thought to structurally how we would manage that and whether we need to schedule an additional special meeting somewhere in there between the time we receive the budgets and the time we're required to notice them in the papers. It does take some time to get the notice out, but if you could just
I can do that.
Thank you. Okay, then we'll turn to decision points, and we're going to say pension investment assumption for last. But the general fund balance current town policy is maintain a general fund unrestricted reserve of 15.5%. GFOA recommends as a best practice that you have at least 2 months in reserves, and this is just shy of that, but within the range that's recommended by the rating agencies. And I just wanted to confirm that no one has an interest in relooking at that as we go in. That's been fairly steady. It took a long time for us to get there.
I'm sorry, Lisa, you're talking about the general fund balance, the percentage?
Yes, the reserves, yes. The unassigned reserves.
Yeah, didn't we set a range as opposed to, or are you just picking the midpoint as a target?
We set a range, you're right, between 15 and 17. The last we adopted for the last budget was 15.5, which is well within the range. And so I just wanted to see if there was any interest in shifting it or not. It makes sense to keep it there for now. We can do it later. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I just wanted to sort of get a sense if there was anyone leaning any differently. Okay. Then
if you round 15.5 up to 16, I guess it's
you could live with it.
It's on the wrong side of 16 for me. But again, if we're talking about general, ranges or proximity to, and I know other people have different thoughts on it, but just again with the sensitivity around overall budget, capital budget, and the likely need to use some reserve, I would certainly prefer to express it in terms of a range, but I'm okay with this for now.
And we can make final determinations. We'll have a better idea in February before the budget process on what projected reserves are. Amy was able to put together our capital reserves are very healthy at 3.5%. And one of our goals will be to use those responsibly upon the recommendation of the town manager and the superintendent and the other boards. So we do have some usable reserves for sure. And we'll watch and see what happens with what other reserves. But I appreciate your commitment to keeping the mill rate as modest as possible. And then, of course, it's raining ARPA. So there may be some ARPA dollars out there as well. I got it in before you, Derek.
You did. Well done.
All right. And then the next thing is the tax collection assumption rate. We have traditionally, really for the last 20 years, used a conservative 98.5% tax collection assumption rate. Our returns have come in traditionally higher. So the question we always get asked is, why do you do that? There are two reasons. One, for precisely what Amy said, sometimes our revenue calculations are variable, like the building committee is coming in 600,000 short. So this is used as a ballast to stabilize uncertain revenues as they come in. We can relook at that. I would recommend we not do it this year and maybe do it over the summer. That's something folks want to look at, because next year we're going to see debt service when we get to the budget modeling. Next year, our debt service sees a huge jump. So we might want to save it for there if that's something people want to look at. This is just a traditional thing, as we heard from Amy. there's already a dip in revenues on the building department, and that's why we have this conservative approach there. So if that's okay, we'll move on to debt service as a percent of operating budget. Last year, we were asked to raise the cap to not to exceed 8%, but continue to target 7%. And the question we get asked a lot is, why do you do that? And again, it goes back to the rating agencies and what is a sustainable amount of debt. Once you get in the 8 to 10, you get close to it being hard on the other operating budgets. As your debt payments go up, you can't spend as much on other departments. And the rating agencies really caution it going above 10 ever, because that puts tremendous downward pressure on other departments. You can't pay for education, you can't pay for public works because everything's going to debt. It's like that commercial many years ago, I'm up to my eyeballs in debt. It's about managing the debt. So I just wanted to confirm we're steady, keeping that its current town policy. Just want to make sure that we do have 2 new members, Mike and Bert. Art.
Just a point of order. Linda Schofield asks, could someone let her in?
Ah.
I don't know who that person might be.
Able to see it, but I'm not seeing her in here. All right, let me work on it. Hold on.
While Amy's working on that, I'll just give a slight update. We did have to push off the presentation by Lockton on the use of health savings reserves to stabilize the increase in health costs. One thing to Derek's point is we do have a healthy general reserve. So, and in our health savings reserve, we have about 38% reserves where we target 20 to 25%. And so, I'll keep an open mind, but I think I'm going to be pretty flexible on using the excess reserves to stabilize the health increases, but we'll hear from our health advisor in February as to what the recommendations there. But I would say initial projections are that the health numbers are at least looking good in this year's budget. Amy, did you want to add to Lockton coming in, that group?
No, they do have a draft policy for us. He was going to try to make this evening, but he had a standing commitment. So February, down with him, and he has a few recommendations that he wants to walk us through, and I guess answer any questions that you all have. He did solidify the 20 to 25% of expected claims. So he did take a look at that again, just to make sure that still should be the target given the inflation, higher cost of everything lately. So we're still at that target, and more to come in February.
Okay, great. And then the last thing we'll be looking at as for decision points is we'll get recommendations from the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen on how much of capital reserves to use. A lot of what's going to drive this budget is going to be the grand list. And unfortunately, we don't know what that's going to be until the end of January. Those numbers are due to the state. So we will get an update from Francine on that in our February meeting, but that's kind of the whole ball game, depending on what happens with the grand list. So we'll be watching that and monitoring that pretty carefully. Were we able to get Linda in?
Shows that she's coming.
Yeah, she's connecting.
I'm sorry, I am such an idiot. I forgot. I didn't set an alarm and got carried away doing other things. My apologies.
Welcome. We're glad you made it. We were just getting ready to start about talking about the pension investment assumption.
Oh, perfect. I'm just interested in that.
Okay. One of the things that folks have had a chance to read the actuary report, I know it's super long, but it's also super interesting. So hopefully, if you haven't had a chance, hopefully you will get a chance to take a look at that. But our actuary is recommending that we move to a 6.25%. In reading the report, it becomes clear why they're recommending that in terms of our target. information we're trying to hit on pension investments. So I wanted to see if there were any questions about the actuary report, any discussions. There were a few things in the actuary report that we should probably follow up on. But I wanted to open up first to members of the board to see if they had any comments on the pension investment assumption. That would be a change. Amy really did a great job getting our actuaries to give us a summary of what different assumptions would mean to the budget. And we'll pull up the budget modeling Excel spreadsheet to look at what that might mean as we go forward so that we can see what impact our decisions might have. But are there any questions or discussion on the pension investment assumption or the actuary report before we do that?
Comments, not necessarily. Maybe I have a few questions. I have a bunch of pages turned. Just a sort of summary. I mean, it was a great report, and certainly sort of, a sobering summary of where things stand. In particular, noticed that the funding level has dropped from 78% to 68% in the last 4 years, and it's the lowest it's been in 10 years. Plan assets fell $900,000. And the return on investment is, depending upon whether you're looking at a market return or an actuarial return, somewhere between 3 and 5.2%, but that's way below what our assumption is. And most importantly, we're paying out last year more than we saw in revenue going in from various sources. And so all of that has me a little concerned. And I think the big takeaway for me is, we've agreed to back off on changes to the assumptions and feather them in more over the last few years. And I think this sort of really hits home that we need to come to grips with where we are on the pension and bite the bullet and get it done.
Are there any other? Thanks, Linda. Are there other comments?
Just simply that there's no good year to do what Linda just said, but they're going to be. But I think they're going to be more difficult years over the next couple of years to do what she's talking about. So I think if we are going to take action on it, unfortunately, it has to be soon.
Now, yeah.
Amy, can you give us a summary of last year? We did make a number of changes to our assumption. We changed the assumption. We incorporated mortality tables. Can you speak to that and sort of the general costs that we did last year?
I don't remember the general cost offhand. I want to say it was a little less than $1 million to update all of the mortality tables for each of the plans. And since we already did that, that was probably the bulk of our largest expenditure. So now it would just be going, and we did a slight decrease in the interest rate assumption, I believe, to 6.625. So those two things they were a major budget driver last year. But the mortality tables are only updated once every 20 years, I believe. So we have some time until the next round where we have that major budget hit again. So we have the opportunity to decrease the interest assumption rate, which, the budget hit doesn't feel good, but it doesn't feel like $1 million either. So, and there is also something, if you noticed on that, sorry, I don't have it in front of me, on the last page where our actuaries put together our budget assumptions for fiscal year 23, you'll actually notice on some of them where we have the no change in assumptions compared to going down to say like the 6.5%, it's actually a decrease in our budget to go down to 6.5%, as opposed to making no changes in assumptions for our asset performance. So some good news there. So it would really be the change from this year to the 625 would be the major budget impact. There's no additional mortality tables. And then the going down to the 625 would include the change in asset performance. and then the interest rate assumption.
One of the things, there were a couple things in the actuary report that were interesting. One was liquidity characteristics on page 47. The actuary noted, and Linda mentioned, that the plan actually had negative cash flow with town and member contributions lower than benefit payments and admin expenses paid out. And they made the suggestion that we consult with our investment advisors with respect to liquidity characteristics of the plan's investment holdings. And because they made that suggestion, and because we are fiduciaries, we just ask you to follow up with our advisor on that.
So I can follow up on that, but I feel like that is kind of misleading. In the report last year, maybe I could see it on our general government fund, because due to what interest rates did and what the market did last year, we actually ended up with our expenditures exceeding our revenues by about like $50,000. And that was the first time that happened in a long time. But for this report, I'm not really sure I guess I understand why they put it in. They want to make sure that we're not pulling assets before we have to in order to pay our benefits. But all they're looking at is the employee contributions and the employer contributions and offsetting that against the benefit payments. Our contributions never equal our benefit payments. That's why we have our investment fund. That's why we have our investment portfolio, because we're using those funds to pay our benefit payments. So we're always going to be in a negative cash position, because that's just the nature of the fund. So I actually want to talk to Jen and see why they even put that in there. If it really is just to take a look and see, hey, make sure that you're not liquidating your assets too fast. And I can tell you that Fiducian actually is not doing that. I get the requests on a monthly basis. So they do not liquidate until the benefit payments are due. So we can certainly follow up with them and see if they have anything to add to that. Because even when you keep reading this, if our fund truly is in a deficit position every year, which it's not, but if it truly was, if you turn to the next page, it has an insolvency risk, and they would show you that this fund would be in jeopardy of insolvency in whatever year, projected year, and we're not even close to that, and that's not a risk that was identified. So we can get some clarity on that. But I just wanted to put that out there, that our funds are not in bad shape at all.
Excellent. That's very helpful. It would be great to get some clarity on that, what they mean by that, and why they think it's something that we should follow up on. So why don't you start with the actuaries before we bring it up to the retirement subcommittee, because you may have the answer for us without having to do that then. And then the second thing they mentioned is the value of doing experience study. The town did an experience study back in 2012. I know GFOA recommends that towns do them every 5 years. So we are due for one. It looks like with all the ARPA money, and we can see what our reserves look like, but this may be a year to do that. What an experience study does is it really digs down into the assumptions to make sure we're using the right assumptions. And I think that's always of value, because we want to make sure we're keeping the promises that we made and that we're doing it in a fair way, so that we're putting aside enough so that future generations don't get burdened with it, or that we're not overtaxing the current taxpayer by having them contribute too much. So Amy, one of the things I was going to ask you to do is, could we get an estimate of what that cost might look like, and how we might put that in the budget, and how we might fund it?
So I reached out to Jen at Milliman today for that request, and she says she'll get something back to me within a week for an estimate. So one positive thing about doing this work is that it doesn't impact our operating budgets. This is a direct expense of the plan, so actually each of the plans pays for the expense.
Chair, I have a sort of a general, hurdle I'm trying to get over here. Given the that Linda Schofield gave voice to, given the fact that actuaries are just prone to decisions, recommendations, that's not what they do, and we have investment advisors, and then all the factors that Amy just cited, it leaves me with in the most general sense of, okay, so what do we do about it? here. I mean, I realize that there are different committees, different players all involved in all of this, but if you do go through it and have that sense of, gee, we're worse off than we were before, that Linda gave voice to, then the very basic question of what are the decision points? What do we do about it? And I'm not sure how we get to that point where we grapple with it. Do you have any counsel on that?
Well, go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, so my 2 cents is we can only follow the guidance as well as we can follow the guidance. So if our actuaries are telling us 6.25, then we should have a plan to get to 6.25. It doesn't mean we have to do it right away. If we were at 7, we don't have to go right to 6.25, but we should have a plan in place to get to 6.25. One thing that we have right now, though, I feel like to our benefit is interest rates are like super low. And the 6.25 is the lowest that they've ever asked us to get to. But markets change, things change, assumptions change. So there is always that chance that next year she's back at 6.5%. So if we did go down to that 6.25%, then we're in a better position than what we started. Whereas if we only went to 6.5, then we break even. However, there is always that chance that she could go down to 6% next year, isn't it? So it's kind of hedging your bets a little bit. So I think that we do the financially responsible thing and we try to follow the target and we have a plan to get to that target. But know that these assumptions change every year. So last year they told us 6.5. This year they're telling us 6.25. Next year they could tell us 7 again. That's probably an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So my perspective is we have a plan to get there. But then if things change, then we're already in a position to accommodate.
The problem with not using the assumption is that if we miss our target, then the unfunded part increases and that falls on the town. So you do want to the extent, Amy's right, to the extent we can get as close as we can. And how do we do that? We rely on our actuaries and our experts to do that analysis. So that makes sense. Once you have that estimate, we can discuss it in February to see if that's something that makes sense to do. It seems to be, given it's a GFOA best practice on the experience study in any event, we can do that. So Amy, if you don't mind, could you pull up the long-term modeling and we'll sort of play with what the difference between a 6.5 and a 6.25 looks like in terms of budget impact?
I have a question for possibly Amy. Just in terms of Linda's comment regarding the funded ratio, I'm sure it goes into a calculation, but how much would that be impacted by, let's say, early retirement? You know?
What do you mean if an employee selected early retirement?
Yeah, like it just, where it just didn't fit the mold. Like maybe they retired at, 58 as opposed to, the biggest cohort, which I believe is like 62. Maybe it's higher. I'm sure there's some level of variation, that they account for. But I was just curious, if someone were to retire early, my thinking there is that there would be, less employee contribution and no impact to less contribution from the employer. Is that fair or no?
So I'd have to look at the plan document. I don't remember offhand, but I believe that you have to be 65 in order to collect. There might be something where it's 62, but then it changes. But I can follow up with Eric on that one. That's more of his wheelhouse. But I know that there's a protection in there for age. So what you said doesn't happen.
Okay.
And one of the things, Derek, about doing the experience study, which I think is kind of what you were getting to, there are assumptions and then there are the realities and how close are our assumptions to the realities. And they do look at it. They do an experience study. They do look at what has our actual experience been to try and get to a truer number. So
And do we have any sense, just as a proxy, as to where what the funded ratio is of the state pension?
I don't.
Oh, we're in much better shape than the state pension, is my guess. Because
trust me, I know that, and I worry about just, again, whether it be ARPA funds or whether it be our pension liability being well funded, them looking for any potential way or reason to not, fund us as a town. So, that's the impetus for the question.
Thank you.
Such that, it would be great to be 80% funded, but if the state is 40% funded, it almost flashes, well, one or the other, red or green, to the state that they're either giving us too much or there's plenty to come back to them, in other ways. So it's a messaging, but it's also optics that I want to be, the more conservative, the better, but also just optically making sure that we don't look like we're either oversaving in any number of ways.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that was a justifiable concern, Derek, when the prior administration and the state financial situation was worse. But that was a Malloy thing, and he's not there. And his OPM director is not there. I don't see the same conversations going on about that. And the state now has a pretty good rainy day fund of its own. So they're not looking to raid the towns the way they were a few years ago when Dan Malloy first brought that up. So I don't see that as big a risk now, or a concern as it was, a few years back. Let's hope.
I will say Martin Looney, they did come out with some of the priorities of the legislature, and one of their priorities is to ease some of the property tax. So that's consistent with what you're saying, Linda. So not to raid this year. So at least this year we should be okay, but knock on wood. So Amy, you want to walk us through the 625?
Well, that would make sense in Hartford for sure. I don't know if they're thinking about any other municipality.
I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So for the police and the town and the OPEB pensions, I had just plugged in on my pension worksheet. Make it a little bit bigger. These are in your packet, but these are all the ARC payments that are recommended for the fiscal year 23 budget from our actuary. So I just plugged them in and then took them over to my projected expenditures worksheet. And right now, the amount that's being plugged in there is the interest rate assumption at 6.25. So you can see for the police, it's a little over $1 million compared to the $928,000 we budgeted this year. And then the town pension, about 1.2, a little over the 1.1 we budgeted this year. And then a slight increase for OPEB to 189 from the 1.6 that was budgeted this year.
So Amy, on the levy calc, the levy calc is much bigger than it's actually going to be because it includes some things that will come in less.
Right.
But just to sort of show what that would be, can you go down to for the taxpayers 350, 450? So you can see that is a 42.8. It's not really going to be a 42.8. Nobody panic. But I do want to look at, okay, if it's 42.8 with those assumptions, what would the mill rate be if it was 6.5?
Put that there so we don't forget what it was. That changes it to 40.19 from the 40.28.
And how big a dollar impact is that? I should have.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't
say that, right?
Sorry.
Can you do a quick mill calculation of a 40.19 versus a 40.28?
You want to see what the
yeah, just the dollars so that we have an idea of what we're talking about.
Lisa, are you saying the total dollars or the impact on the typical household?
Typical
right.
household at 350, yeah.
All right. So let me just these here. It goes from 95.70 to 95.48, and then 12.304 to 12.276, and then $15,038 to $15,003.
Okay, so divided over 12 months, that's what, in terms of, that's like, can you just do that math for me? 9548 to 9570 is what?
$1.83 a month.
Right. So you can see it's,
yeah,
it's not in terms of the benefit to the fund is, it's important that we do this. The harm to our taxpayers is that within the realm that we think it's worth doing that this year. So that's one of the things. I'm not asking people to make the decision right now, but you can see that it's not a huge impact on an individual's household per month. But Amy, what is the total dollar difference between the two, to Linda's point?
About $200,000.
So that's within the realm of, I think, something we could accommodate. It doesn't make a lot of sense not to do that from my perspective. It's not a decision night to night, but it's the beginning of a conversation. And I don't know if folks had any thoughts on this that they wanted to share tonight. We'll do that, take another look at this again in February and in March as we get more information from the other boards. Okay, hearing none, we'll then move on to capital. And I put together, as you know, a way too long PowerPoint that we're not going to do, but sort of summarized from the book that I love by Robert Bland on municipal budgeting. I took the concepts from there and incorporated the funds that we use. And Amy, if you could just pull up the Excel spreadsheet, and then of course had Amy review it to make sure I'm not losing my mind. But there are a lot of capital funds, a lot of capital terms, and some of them are very similar, but they're very different. Like we have CNR payback and just CNR. We have the Capital Reserve Fund, and we've got Capital and CNR Fund. So Amy, if you could pull that up, we'll sort of go through it quickly.
seconds opening.
Well, Amy's pulling that up. Sort of the way for those who are new, Mike and Bert and any members of the public, there are sort of three ways we think about capital. There's recurring capital that happens every year. That because it happens every year, you put it in the operating budget or tie it to the operating budget to the extent you can. There's non-recurring capital, that's sort of variable capital that sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, but you don't need the exact same thing everywhere. And that lands in both the operating budget as CNR payback and in sort of outer space for the other variable, and we pay for it usually not using tax dollars. So that would be using capital reserves or some of the funds that we have out there. And then the third bucket is bonded capital, and that's what we borrow for. If you think of the mill rate, the operating budget is present dollars. That's what we tax for, the ghost of Christmas present. Past or capital reserves, we've already taxed for it and saved, so we're going to use the savings. And then the ghost of Christmas future is bonded capital. When we borrow for capital, it doesn't hit the mill rate in the current year, it hits usually 2 years out. But Amy, if you could talk a little bit about CNR payback and how that differs from just normal CNR. And CNR, I'm sorry, we're trying to use non-acronyms, is capital non-recurring.
So something that was set up by a previous Board of Finance many moons ago, this line item that you see here, actually it's these two line items, but for the purpose of discussion, I'll just use this one. So where it says Board of Selectmen operating capital non-recurring, is $416,250. So basically what they decided to do, over the years, when you're trying to reduce a budget, the easiest thing to do is to reduce capital because those are the big dollars. And one way to avoid that is to make it so that you can't reduce your capital because you need to pay for it over a longer term. So basically what they did is, actually, I wish I had my budget model in. Basically what they did is they took $416,250 and we include that, say, for fiscal year 23. So we're going to spend $416,250, but we're going to pay for it over 5 years. So for fiscal year 23, we're not going to pay $416,250. We're going to spend $416,250, but we're not going to pay that. We're only going to pay 1/5 of that, which is $83,250. So then the next year, we basically do the same thing. So fiscal year 24, we pay for it for 5 years. So fiscal year 24, yep, we're going to pay, or we're going to spend the $416,250 again, but again, we're only going to pay for it for 1 year, which is that $83,250. But don't forget, we didn't finish paying off what we spent in fiscal year 23. So now we have to pay the $83,250 from fiscal year 23, and then the $83,250 for fiscal year 24 that we spent. So this goes on for 5 years and it cycles. So that's why you're always spending $416,250, no matter what. The only room that you have to play with is that 1 year $83,250. So in fiscal year 23, say we decided that we needed to cut the budget, we're going to cut capital. We cannot cut the $416,250. We can only cut $83,250 because the prior years we already spent that money. We're basically loaning ourselves the money interest free.
Well, you can change the 5th year output, right? So by spending less, you'll still incur the 416, the 5 times the 83 every year until you lower it such that your 5th year will then drop that by whatever the amount is.
Exactly.
So I would just say we're not beholden to spend $416,250 in perpetuity. At a minimum, well, I guess in this case 5 years, but it could be in that 5th year lower.
Mm-hmm. Right. You can make any adjustments in that 5th year. You can get rid of it. You can make it higher. You can keep it the same. Exactly what Derek said.
So one of the things that we have in there is we do keep it in the operating budget. And the reason why is because every year there's some little amount of capital we need. And it differs every year, but we always need to buy something, which is why we tie it to the operating budget as opposed to a capital budget or elsewhere. And one of the questions that, to Amy's point, is it does come up, should we pre-fund a higher amount there? That 416 has been 416 for many, many years. When in the last 4 years, the 416, remember that's non-recurring, so not every year is stuck in there. But for after 2008, the Great Recession, what happened was we put the plow truck in there. It's a recurring expense in a non-recurring fund. We had the police admin vehicles. We had all sorts of stuff that happened every year that we put in CNR because it was a way to reduce the budget. And that led to not being able to buy non-recurring stuff in the operating budget. And that ended up hurting mostly Parks and Rec. So for the past few years, we've been pulling stuff out. The plow truck is now in the operating budget. Police vehicles and police admin vehicles are now in the operating budget to free up some of that 416. So that's where capital non-recurring, that is stuff that you don't want to bond for. It's a smaller number, less than 250,000 for projects in that number. But that's why it's tied to the operating budget. But sometimes we need more stuff than can fit in that little 416. And how do you pay for that? And that's been the perpetual problem we've had for years and years. And there are other ways to do it. You can do it out of the sometimes funds, like the sewer use fund, the sewer assessment fund. We have an trust fund. Sometimes we get state and federal grants. But one of the things that Amy came up with that I think was a really good idea and that I think is serving us well now is we created a capital reserve fund. And that's a holding fund. And what goes into that fund? Well, at the end of every year, sometimes there are budgetary savings. And sometimes there's extra revenues. And if there is extra money, we look first, do we need to shore up our general reserves? Do we have enough? Right now we do. Do we need to shore up our health savings fund? Nope, we're in good shape there. Do we need to make an extra contribution to our pension fund? Probably not. And the fourth thing we say is, okay, now we have extra money. Where does it go? We'll put it in capital reserves because we always need more capital than we can afford in the operating budget. And because we've already taxed for it, in the following year or at year-end close, we'll take that money and spend it so that we've already taxed for it. So it doesn't affect the current mill rate. It's already been paid for in a past mill rate. That's the ghost of Christmas past. So that was sort of the theory behind that. And it can also, capital reserves can be used for the little CNR stuff, but it might be used to not having to bond a project. We might just pay cash for something. One of the things that's in the capital reserve fund is bond premium, and that is assigned. So when we go out to bond, sometimes we get a bond premium. And when we get a bond premium, it goes into the capital reserve fund, but it can't be used to purchase capital. We use it to offset the debt service costs of what we borrowed on. And Amy, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Lisa, quick question. Sorry,
yeah.
Amy. The capital reserve fund can be literally used to pay for anything. Am I correct there? While it serves the purpose of ideally paying for capital items, it is literally just an extension of the general reserve. Is that correct?
Yes.
It is not allocated or earmarked for any for capital only. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's accurate. So we created the capital reserve because Lisa had mentioned our reserves are in a good position. Our pension is getting there, but we're on target where we need to be. We don't really have, our health insurance fund is healthy. We don't really have any other deficiencies other than our capital. So it is, in the sense that it's in a capital reserve, is for part of it is intended to be used for capital. But like you said, if the Board of Finance wanted to change that and say we got low in our reserves one year and they wanted to pull it out and use it for something else, they absolutely can, yes.
One of the things that Maria did is, if you look in the budget book, and I can't remember, it's like tab 26 or 27, she put together a smaller capital non-recurring CNR improvement plan, where it looks at all the small capital needs, and it's huge. So there really wasn't any mechanism to fund it. And so what this has enabled us to do is to fund it without doing a huge spike in the mill rate. And this is typical. A lot of towns do that. Massachusetts calls it a use of, they call it free cash. And free cash is the definition of budgetary savings or excess revenues. Most people, or what I've seen in Massachusetts and Connecticut is, you might one year, anywhere from 1% to 3% of the operating budget you might have left over, or you might have not, because revenues came in much lower than expected. So it's variable. It's not as steady a number as the mill rate. But when we have money, we can do it. This is the kind of fund where I really need the pickup truck, but oops, we didn't have as much revenue as we thought. You're going to have to fix the pickup truck and make it last for one more year. That's the kind of fund that can accommodate that. And that's why it's there. But
I appreciate that, and I remember the history, and I appreciate the context. That, again, as you related to earlier, for anybody in the public who's looking at this as somewhere where there's $3.5 to $4 million of money, it's a pot of money, all right. While we have the best interest is to fund capital. This really is, again, just an extension. It's extension of our general fund. So yes. It's just for context for people who might not be as familiar.
And it's an important context. Yeah, it's important to point out, because it is an additional, because some people might say, don't spend it on capital, let's do it as tax relief. That's a fair point. Absolutely a fair point to make, an important one. And so, one of the things we have as our goals is how to strategically use this reserve fund to not increase the mill rate. So we'll be looking at that. And the other thing, we do want to, you always want to have a little left over at the end of the year, but you don't want to have too much that it's an overtax. And one of the things we're struggling with, and part of that is because of the pandemic, is we're getting wildly different revenues than we had budgeted, and part of that couldn't have been anticipated. But to the extent we can work to get those numbers closer to accurate, we want to, that will help us not overtax. So that's that. And then if you can go to the next, we'll go to the funds. So and this is, you guys all know this, so we'll just go through this really quick. The general fund is the major fund. That's where stuff comes in where we don't know where else to put it. That's where the taxes come in. Capital non-recurring fund. You would get transfers from the general fund, from capital reserves fund, not transfers from bond purchases. That was my error. But some of the other revenue funds that you saw on the other page could be put in there. And these are things that have been appropriated. They become a checking fund. These are things that have been approved. This is where you pay it out of. Capital reserves fund is like a savings fund. We just talked about that with Derek. And then the capital project fund is where you put your bonded. So if you think of capital non-recurring, that's mostly for things you're going to use in a year. Capital project fund would be things that you bonded for that's going to take years to spend out of. But because they all have similar names, it gets a little overwhelming. So here's the cheat sheet with one error. Eliminate the transfers from bond purchases. We did do that once, but we don't do that regularly. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions on sort of capital and how, but Derek's right. It's a lever, and it's a tool that the Board of Finance has. And it's often a big tool that we have as we sort of moderate the mill rate and look to it.
One question quickly, on the preceding slide, the Board of Education CNR fund, does that work the same way as the Board of Selectmen CNR, operating CNR? Is it just spent on different materials?
Yes, that's correct. It works the exact same way.
Yeah, okay.
They have that in their operating budget. It's not in the Board of Selectmen budget. And that was originally done because they weren't regularly purchasing buses, and the buses were getting cut because they were trying to save money on their budgets. That was many, many years ago. So that was part of the reason, was to systematically fund school buses. And that's where a lot of that should go, and hopefully will go. All right. Does anyone have any? We'll come back. Capital keeps coming up and up and up. But this is kind of a useful cheat sheet, we thought. It shows you sort of the different ones.
I like it.
Well, thank you, Derek. And then I'll see, are there any other questions people have on capital or on anything else? All right. I think we actually, first of all, Amy, thank you for putting everything together. Yes, Derek.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the agenda, and when you said anything else, I wasn't sure if you meant literally anything else. I do, you brought it up earlier, and I am a little bit concerned about the calendar. You'd mentioned that it was tight, and I'd like to go back to that and try and get a meeting on the calendar that might fit everybody's schedule earlier rather than later. To the extent that we're jammed in any way, to give feedback and have anybody respond to our feedback, whether it's the BOS or BOE, is important. I don't want to be in a position where the Board of Finance is getting jammed with a larger budget than maybe anticipated and not be able to react, and then be in a position where we're effectively being told to send it to a referendum. I don't like that situation, and I don't want to be in it. So if we prepare ourselves, one, to make sure that we have enough time to digest it and send feedback back, I think would be prudent. And secondly, if we're short on time, then more so than ever, I think it's very important that the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education prioritize such that they can react quickly to any potential feedback that we have. And then we can decide to do what we will if they decide to change the budget or not. So it is a concern of mine.
Yeah, I have that same concern. Amy, so in February, can you give us some suggestions on how best to address that to make sure that there is adequate time to give feedback? And that's, again, why the prioritization of especially capital and perhaps new programming is really, really helpful, just simply because of the time crunch.
Yeah, sure. So to Derek's point about everybody's calendar syncing up, I think that's probably the hardest part. So I can send out a doodle poll, and then we can work together to see what dates work for everybody and put some tentative dates on the books for back and forth. And then if we need additional time, we'll plan on the budget going to referendum at the first budget hearing. And then if we need additional time, you always have the continuation, but we'll just build in the dates as if we're going to send it on the first shot. And then you have some extra cushion, if you will, to work with. So if that works for you guys, I can do that.
Is that good, Derek?
And then yeah, that sounds great. And then I guess it's just the impetus is on us to, or it's on us to give as good feedback as we can earlier in the process than later. I guess would be our responsibility, kind of in that timing as well.
Yeah, so that was I think you're right. And part of the discussion on the pension investment assumption was to begin that process early to sort of get that discussion going. And really, I think our board is leaning towards we're going to implement the 625. It's not a big dollar number and it doesn't move the mill rate that much. And it's an important thing to do. So we're certainly leaning that way. Amy, if you want to convey that to the other boards, just lean that way. I think that would be helpful. I know we committed to coordinating with the other boards. I don't know if Wendy's still on.
I'm here.
So Wendy has heard that. I'll reach out to Susan and let her know sort of what we're thinking there as well on the Board of Ed side.
Can I just So
Yeah.
I just want to comment on that. It just to me, it helps us out if we just go in with that assumption, because last year, the back and forth we had going from 6.7, I think it was last year, 6.7.5 to 6.275 to 6.5. If we just know that going in, we don't have to argue the point.
So maybe to Amy, if you could give some thought, if there's something we haven't thought about, whether it would make sense to sort of communicate to both boards that we should use the 625 going into the budget process. And we can make that decision in February after everyone's had a few minutes to think about it overnight during this last month. But I think it's, Lindy, thanks for that comment. That's helpful. And let's just see if there's something we haven't thought about. We will, by that point, have the grand list numbers. So we'll have a lot more information in February. Does that make sense to folks? Okay, I always was telling my children that we're the board of slow. So to the extent we can be non-drama and slow, we'll work towards that. All right. Are there anything else, people? Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, again, my apologies for missing the beginning of the meeting. I know I did miss a vote on the closure of those 3 special revenue funds, which was something I've advocated for some time. So please record me as a yes vote on that, if that's within the rules. And I did have some questions. So Amy, I'll give you a buzz tomorrow on the report that you did and the monthly financial summary. I had some questions. You probably had the same ones from other people, so I don't want to take.
Yeah, Amy did give a nice summary there, but if it shows up in the morning, you can just zip through it and see what.
Yeah, usually takes a couple days. Well, I'll wait a couple days until I can watch it.
Or reach out. No, I didn't mean to say that. Definitely call if you want.
I can send you the summary, Linda.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else folks have, or any information they want for the next meeting? We'll hopefully have locked in, come in, talk to us about the use of health reserves in the upcoming budget. And we should have the grand list presentation ready by then. Is there anything else?
Move we adjourn.
To approve the minutes of the last.
Approve the minutes of December 21.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. So thanks to Art for catching one correction in there. It was Art who made the motion to appoint Derek and Bert to the Personnel Subcommittee, and then we voted by almost acclamation. So that was changed to the minutes. Did anyone have any other changes?
Looked good to me.
All right, thank you to our town clerk, who really does such a lovely job. Very appreciative.
Do we need to vote on to adopt the minutes?
I'll move approval.
Oh, yeah, we do, because there was a change. Can we have a motion to accept the minutes with the change as described?
Yeah. Art said yes, and I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion passes. Is there anything else I forgot on the agenda? All right. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Good night, everyone. Thank you.